All right, and we're live. So, welcome. And my name is Latu Cosmos, and I want to get right into the live and not really, not get into too much else. Today, I wanted to talk about the future of Africa, and I mean, this is something that I've been obsessed with for a long time now. Just thinking about where we came from, first of all, and where we're headed, and so. I want to get right into it. And, for me, when I think about the future of Africa, Black Panther as a movie played a big role in triggering my imagination for the future in a way that was, brand new to me. So, as ever since then, I've been flirting with Afrofuturism and what that means, and not just the technology or yeah, most of the time with when we imagine Afrofuturism, it's about the new tech. I've also looked at the fashion that comes with Afrofuturism. So, some really amazing stuff visually. Made like in the arts in general, Afrofuturism really portrays a an amazing possible future for our people. But for me, I'm more of the I wanted to look at, okay, let's look at it philosophically. What are some of the philosophies that that we will come to inhabit, or rather, some of the philosophies that we will come to accept, and epistemologies that we will come to accept as a result of you know our creativity now. And for me, one of the things I thought about is I don't know if it's a real term or not, but I came up with this Afrophilosofuturism, so focusing specifically on not just the arts or the aesthetics of Afrofuturism, but specifically the philosophies and ways of thinking that comes, that will come from what we are able to create now, and build on, what others have done before. And I know that when it comes to Afrofuturism, you know, the mother of of all Afrofuturism, Octavia Butler. Um, I need to do more reading in regards to her perspective on this, because she has radically explored this aspect of our imagination, and specifically when it comes to our religious beliefs, or how we view ourselves in a future, or in a time that is separate from our historical reality, and what has impacted us in the last however long. And so having an imagination about what kind of philosophies we will have. And so before I went into what her imagination had, I wanted to look into what I could come up with, or what I could explore on my own, and conclusions that I would arrive at in regards to how we view ourselves. And so Afrophilosophuturism is, for me, at the beginning of that journey of developing, refining, and just being creative with how we could view ourselves in the future. And so, but when it comes to Africa specifically, I wanted to look at, obviously we have to tie it down to some aspect of our reality. It's all fun to to come up with it, to imagine things. A majority of the time we are stuck in our imagination, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But I wanted to take it at also another direction, which is looking at it in as it pertains the philosophies of our future, um, and specifically to our development as African people, and as African youth, which is the future of the world. Really, we have to look at it like that. We have to raise these important questions, fundamental questions to our development. And so when we look at the philosophy that I'm talking about, I want to look at the why. Why are we doing the things that we do? And so, what is the driving factor behind our decisions? Then the regular ones are economic. Most of the time it's like, oh, let's make this decision because it makes sense economically or financially. Looking at the numbers, this decision makes sense. And so utilizing that as the why behind our decisions, that's one way of going about it. Another way of going about it is, some people want to have high status. It's like, okay, you want to be seen in this light or that light, so you will make decisions that are based on that, um, based on that criteria. So okay, that's another way of looking at it. Um, there's also there's a spiritual way of looking at decision making and philosophy for development. Looking spiritually is our decisions helping us become more spiritually attuned, and a spiritually more conscious. Is that the why behind our decision making? That's another way. Or just pure intellectual curiosity is another reason people could make decisions in regards to our development. And so looking at it like, hey, this just makes sense, when you think about it, just logically it makes sense. Then okay, that's the path that can be, that is the criteria that can be used for making decisions as it pertains to our development. And so I kind of wanted to start raising those questions. So as we, whatever capacity you may see yourself contributing to the future, on building the future, asking yourself, why am I doing that? Not, oh, I come from this background, so I got to do this, but dig deeper, why? Why do you do that? Why is that important? Where does that lead you? Looking at it, is this sustainable, for the next 1,000 years, instead of, just thinking about the next year or next quarter, but thinking about it in a long way. And so where does it end? Where does it lead you personally? Is it, does it bring you peace? Does it bring you joy? Does it bring you pain? Does it, or what does it, like, what is the end goal, or what is the end result of you making decisions with the pattern that is, dictated by either economic status, economic, gains, spiritual, intellect, whatever it is. Just asking ourselves those questions and thinking out loud about them, when it comes to our decision making. Um, yeah, like I said, we have to investigate those ways, that we make decisions, and always be conscious of our collective why we're doing things. And we have to be careful of, obviously, I don't want to say careful, but we have to look at the epistemology from which we are operating. So, what operating system is running in our head right now? Um, and so, the question when it comes to epistemology, and talking about, for me, the question at the end of the day is, whose imagination or, language are we using to construct our reality and our future? And so what kind of cultural schemas are we or assumptions are we using, what are that we have accepted, as this is part of the reality, and then making decisions based off of that. So we have to ask ourselves, whose epistemology are we imagining the future through? Um, and so that means that when you are studying, looking at who are you studying, first of all, who's the person that is writing the things that you are, studying and using as building blocks for the future. You have to look at, their identity, their epistemology. And so, when you're reading, specifically if it's about Africans, from whose perspective is the book talking? So is it an inside out perspective or an outside in perspective? So for example, an outside in perspective, you know from outside in perspective would be like most history books that talk about our people, is talking about, refers to the Africans from, their point of view. And so when you're reading it, you're inhabiting the author's point of view, which most of the time is European or is non-African. And so, but if you are an African yourself, and you're reading about yourself from, the European perspective, then that results in, you otherizing yourself. Even though you're reading about yourself, you're reading about yourself from a perspective that is outside of yourself, which can create that kind of separation and dissonance, um, where you are an African, but at the same time you are not. And so, in a lot of ways, when you read a lot of books that are written from that European perspective, then it perpetuates the perspective that they have about us. So when you read about African people in the textbooks from Europeans when they first came, like, talk about even for first contact, Most of the time we are hearing it from the European. They saw these African people and they saw this, but reading books that show you as African people, we saw these other people coming to our land, and seeing it from that perspective can bring I would say a conjunction of our consciousness, um, when it comes to our history and our overall understanding of ourselves, especially our place in history. uh, and so when we go once again, when we're looking at it from that outside in perspective, you know it cements the most of the time the unfavorable perspective that others have of us as Africans. And so we're going to operate out of that perspective as we're thinking about our future, and that can be a very damaging uh, pattern for the future. When you're seeing yourself from how Europeans see us, see African people, then you're only operating from a lower version of yourself. Whereas if you look at it from the inside out perspective, where we are learning from an African point of view, you're learning about our history from our people's perspective. That it's, in a way, it becomes now self evaluation and self reflection. It's sort of a meditation on yourself rather than somebody else's meditation on you. It becomes us looking at ourselves, and evaluating us, and our place in history, and where we come from, and ultimately where we are headed. um, and I believe that engaging in, whether it is just simply intellectually, or even at a deeper spiritual level, having that perspective can be self-healing, where we're looking at ourselves, you know like we're looking in a mirror instead of somebody else looking at us through a glass wall. We're looking at ourselves from a glass wall. We can look at ourselves introspectively, which is, for me, I believe, a much more powerful position to imagine the future from. And so that self healing will, I believe, ultimately result in self development that is rooted in, I think, is rooted in a much more accurate, and I would say, more importantly, empowering, um, uh, foundation for the future. And I think, having that, being rooted in oneself and one's history, and looking at ourselves from a self-evaluative perspective, gives us limitless potential when we're imagining the future. Because if you can only think of yourself from how others see you, that's a very limited and very fickle foundation to stand on. And so when we look at ourselves, from a self-evaluative process perspective, then we have that limitless potential for the future. And I think the most important thing when it comes to being able to look at ourselves, in a mirror rather than somebody else look at us through a glass, is that we can begin the process of owning ourselves and owning our experience and owning our narrative, which extends to ultimately owning our soul and owning our mind, and being able to be conscious of why we make decisions and why we think certain ways, and what we could possibly imagine what the future, how we can imagine what the future could be, and the assumptions that we can use to build that future. I think that, for me, that is the greatest gift of being able to look at, the greatest gift of evaluating our perspectives and evaluating why we do the things that we do, and then looking at the assumptions that we use to then make decisions based on what we've accepted. And so owning ourselves, I think, is honestly the beginning, of Afrophilosophy. Is first getting your mind to a point where you can look at yourself, evaluate yourself, and own your experience first and foremost. What you have seen, what you have learned through experience, own first and foremost, and then looking at our history from ours, that is from a people that from our people that have experienced it, who can speak of it from a knowing point of view, and also Garvey said this, is that people who write with a love for us. So authors that um, write from a perspective of love and not, somebody who's trying to take something from us or somebody who sees us from a negative point of view, is reading authors such as, I have a list of recommendations. Just for example, reading books by Dr. John Henry Clark, Notes for an African World Revolution. That book, reading something like that is, I recommend that one first and foremost because it's able to catch us up on some of our greatest minds and action-minded leaders like Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, Patrice Lumumba, Tom Mboya of Kenya, and so many more. It's able to talk about their unfinished revolutions and how, what the next steps are, and really looking at who are our, enemies, people who do not care for the African people and people who wish to harm us, and being able to confidently say that not everyone is out for the wellness of our people, and accepting that, okay, that is a reality. Not everyone is our friend, and that is fine. And ultimately looking at how can we bring about a day and a time when we are no longer a prey on this planet, where we can be, you know, I don't want to say a predator, but somebody that people don't want to mess with because they know that messing with us will mean something not good for them. And I think that is a mindset that took me a long time to be able to speak out loud about, to even think about, is that Africans need to defend themselves. Like, we need to defend ourselves. And so I think the first step towards thinking like that or accepting that is owning yourself, owning your soul, owning your mind first and foremost, and then going from there. You can't get to a position where you're defending yourself when you are still, spiritually and mentally reliant on people who may not have your own best interest in mind. Um, and the second book really for me to look at is by Cheikh Anta Diop, and it's called Black Africa. The the case for building a federated United States of Africa. That book for me, the most important lesson from that is that, you know, as we've seen so many coups happen in a lot of countries in general, and this is a lesson for any country really, but looking for us as African peoples, is that when a coup happens, most of the time that ring of freedom or liberation rings true for a few years perhaps at most, and then it fizzles out and goes back into chaos. And what the remedy that Cheikh Anta Diop proposes for this problem that we have endured for a generation is that we need political education. Anybody who, specifically for the soldiers in the, that are going to, help protect our people, is political education, understanding, where they stand, where their interests are, and who they are protecting and why they're there. But looking at political education and understanding history and being students first and foremost, being students of history and being students of reality. That's the first thing he recommends before we even think about anything else. The people who are going to be protecting our people have to have that understanding, and everybody as a people, we have to understand that as well. We can't be ignorant, and that is a problem. Is that if we don't have an understanding of history, a clear understanding of history, we are going to allow the same thing to be ran on us over and over and over. To build anything worthwhile, we first have to have a consciousness that allows for us to recognize patterns and be able to dispel them, and that comes through political education. And he goes further into other aspects of the field that are necessary. One lesson today, and the third is by, and it's called "The Destruction of Black Civilization." That book, that book is such an interesting one. It's a book that I had looked at for years, but I never quite picked up because it was quite intimidating, to be honest. I didn't ready to be able to tackle such questions that he was able to answer in that book. But I recommend it because more than a lot of other literature, That one has it answers so many questions in a straightforward manner. It doesn't beat around the bush. It is not too intellectual, where you can't, it's hard to understand. It's very straightforward, able to really get to the point, and offers solutions, that at a deeper level, basically being able to reconstruct a singular black civilization that has, the best tenets of the old ones, and that is something that is so powerful. Being able to somebody who has, you know, looked at all our, our past and was able to culminate all of the lessons and everything that we have that has survived thus far, and to put it all in one book and say, here is, you know, here are some bricks for being able to build the future. And so I want to be able to end this live ASAP, but I think so far, just looking at those three authors and looking at the questions that I've raised so far, I think it's we could discuss it for at great lengths. But I think before we can go any further, it's important that we are able to cement first and foremost the ownership of ourselves, and ownership of our mind, ownership of our soul before we can step out on any type of meaningful journey towards an end that we can imagine a worthwhile end. And so, thank you for watching, and I will continue to raise these questions and explore these questions and explore these understandings as we look at the future of Africa, because there are um, so many things happening in the world right now that, for me, it's triggering a a response from me. And for me, this is how I know how to respond, is to share my perspective on the issues, and opportunities, and see where it leads. But I think that it's important that we all contribute what we think about what we are seeing, so that we can all be able to get a better view, of our reality, especially as African peoples, in the future that we that is that is in front of us. And so thank you for watching, and please contribute any thoughts you have, on the questions of what of investigating why we do things as African people, and why why that question in itself and ownership of oneself is important to our reality. So I'll leave you with that, and stay tuned for more as we go further into these questions. Thank you.